WOR Tier 3. My name is George, or you can call me Boffers, whichever it is that you do prefer. I'm here with Epic Freestyler, and tonight I'm going to be doing the Tier 3 with him. Obviously, usually you are used to hearing the wonderful dulcet tones of Reese, Hyperactive, but tonight I'm filling in instead because that man is applying for a visa or something. I don't know. He's a man that works in mysterious ways. He works definitely a bit too hard, and yeah, so here we are. It is Hungary. It is round 5 of the WOR season, Tier 3, and the championship is starting to strike a bit of a fever pitch with a driver, which I believe goes by the name of Andre Lopez, who won 2 races on the bounce last time around, so he's going to be in a strong position to try and follow that through here in Hungary. So I don't know whether Freestylers is back in the game or back around to have some issues. Beautiful. All right then, let's crack on. I'm the new person here, so you're the veteran. Who are the people that we need to be looking out for today?
Andres Lopez, he's had a comeback, of course, in the last 2 races. From a disappointing first 2 races, I believe he only scored 8 points, to now up into getting back-to-back wins, of course, was massive in Baku. He went full on. And then in the last race, sadly, I had issues, so again, I had to miss last race. But he's definitely one. I believe it is Cordor who is leading the championship here. He hasn't come out of the pits just yet. Also, Lucas Eduardo, quite unlucky so far. If I'm having a look where he is, I believe he will be down to 5th. I think, yeah, 5th in the standings, I believe. 5th or 6th. And currently, you know, he's gone with a bit of bad luck recently. Back-to-back DNF, same as his rival Tax as well. But it's pretty close. It's too difficult to say who is actually going to do well.
Yeah, generally it is, but I think we're going to start getting some good laps set in right away here. It's going to be the first run out for pretty much every single driver at the moment. Of course, some still sitting in the pit lane, but we're about to have first time laps started. This will be where drivers are going to lay down their benchmark on these soft tyres and low fuel. Pretty much the only time that we'll see these soft tyres used over the course of this evening as well, because despite obviously F122 uses the medium hard strategy a fair amount, it's also a very tyre intensive track, Hungary. Often overheating the tyres because you get really heavy direction changes, so these soft tyres won't hold on very long if you were to do them in a race setting, and even in a qualifying setting you can start to get overheating towards the end of that third sector. At the moment though, we're on board with Andre Lopez. As you mentioned, he's been on a bit of a hot streak lately, and we'll see what he's got to offer on his first time lap in the AlphaTauri. So far it's relatively tidy, but it's difficult to say at this track particularly whether things look quick from the camera perspective that F1 gives us. But so far, all good. Purple Sector 2, if the game is to be believed, despite the fact that that is often very, very wrong. And now rounding the final 2 corners in this little hairpin complex towards the end of the Hungaroring. This famed complex in the Hungaroring. Very difficult last corner for traction, but he manages it well and is now just going to drive to the line to slot himself into P1 at the moment with the second lap posted with a 15.5. That's immediately going to be shot down by Tim Alders though, as we're going to see those times start to tumble.
Yeah, definitely a good lap from Andres Lopez, close to Tim Alders, just over a 10th off. Good lap from Tim Alders though, I have to say, but Alexander Dimas, out of nowhere with 1 minute 15.1, definitely a good lap there. This track, like you said, very heavy on tyre wear and especially tyre temperatures. But also, this track is very unforgivable for ERS as well, because you don't seem to gain much back compared to some other tracks, for instance, like Belgium or even Azerbaijan. You gain, I believe it's around 10 to 20% ERS if you don't use any overlap, which isn't great, especially around a track like this where it is very dependent when you get onto the straights that you have enough ERS, especially if the driver behind you has DRS. So I think that's going to be the important part, but I think the other important part is here, as we know, grid position is so important. Yeah. It's almost like a wider Monaco. You know, you can't really overtake until turn 1. That's really, you know, we see the pit straight is really the only place where you can we see most drivers overtake, and into turn 1 as well, of course. But it's such a strange track for its layout and just for how you have to drive it.
No, you're absolutely right. And at the moment, if I'm to be believing, that Ivan Santamaria was on a good lap there, but it seemed to have gone away from a little bit in that middle sector, or sorry, that final sector. Either way, yeah, you are right about the ERS usage, particularly because ERS is very dependent, if you look at it from a physics perspective, at turning kinetic forces into energy. That's how the system works. And generally, that requires you to do a lot of heavy braking in order to generate that kinetic force to go back into the battery. And on this track, as you mentioned, there's only really one heavy braking zone, which is considered to be turn 1. That's obviously going to be your primary overtaking opportunity too. And with that being your only real opportunity to gain ERS and to overtake, obviously means that you're going to lose a lot of it over the lap because you're constantly deploying, because a lot of this lap is quite on throttle despite how many corners there are. Because those corners are fast, they're flowing, and there's not much of tapping the brakes, so you're not going to recover much. So like you say, grid position, absolutely a priority. Secondly, managing your ERS battery usage throughout the race is also going to be exceptionally important, so we'll keep our eye on that as we go through the race. But for now, let's focus in on the grid position stuff. After the first runs have all been somewhat completed, it is quite the gauntlet been thrown down from Alexander Dimas with a 1:15.1, as you mentioned, almost 0.3 of a second faster than anybody else out there at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. A very good first lap, an unexpected first lap. I was expecting around what drivers like Tim Alder's got, around a 15.4, maybe a 15.5. Alexander Dimas threw that straight out the window and went with the 15.1. Also, by the way, an underdog here, Ian Van Unen. We didn't, for a second, I was shocked to see he was up there into P2, but he is. So another very sneaky lap from another driver to get even closer to Alexander Dimas. But like you were saying, he's so far out in the lead so early on, it will be quite difficult to gain that and possibly more from even more runs from Alexander Dimas if he improves.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got to imagine that the track condition is also going to improve as well as the tyres of all 20 cars start to rubber in the track a bit more. You find a bit more grip through these very fast and flowing corners. Always going to gain you the extra couple of hundredths or even tenths in some instances that you're going to need to catch back up to Alexander Dimas. So maybe there is hope for everybody here. But for Dimas being so far ahead, there's also hope that he can get even further away from the rest of the field on qualifying pace and set him up for a rather sensational opportunity on the first lap. Anyway, Maloney has just completed his first lap in the Ferrari. That's going to place him at a 15.5 in 6th place. A pretty respectable opening there from the Ferrari, but needs to get back around and into the pit lane if he wants to try and get 3 full runs done, because he is out of sync with the rest of the grid.
Definitely. But I have seen this with Maloney over the season. It seems like he has a very different strategy from other drivers. Maloney currently sits 3rd in the Drivers' Championship fight, losing a bit last race with only 6th place, but it's still pretty good from him. He's had a really big comeback lately. He won at Circuit of the Americas, if anybody was watching that. But he's again had a few performances where it's sort of gone a little bit more quiet, with 5th and 6th in the last 2 races. But I do see Maloney as a very consistent driver. Of course, I believe he's a season 11 champion as well. So there's some riding here that he can mount a championship offense and defense as well, off of previous seasons. So we could be seeing possibly a different Maloney coming into this race, more thinking about the title battle than just gaining a couple of positions.
Well, gaining positions, like you say, is going to be hard, so it is a wise man's race around here at Hungary. Sometimes if you're in a championship fight, it's better just to take the points, because points make prizes at the end of the day, and at the end of the season, they all come to count. At the moment, though, Alexander Dimas is looking to improve on his time once again. He is 600ths, nearly 700ths of a second up on his previous best time. We'll see if there's anything left to be gained in this final sector, where traction is very difficult to find in these extremely long radius, but still relatively quick corners. Upshift to 5th to try and get that power down as early as possible in that final corner. And there's a whole 10th of an improvement on top of what he already had. That is a 15.018. That is a stonking lap time. And even the improvement of Ian Van Unen just behind, along with Franek Morowak, is not enough to get close. Still 3 seconds adrift.
Yes, definitely. I do feel like Alexander Dimas, and this could be another track that he's strong at. He's had a few tough races. The first 2 races, no points. Second place in both the last 2 races. He's definitely up there, getting more consistent. And it's like he's finding his stride more with the grid, and he's finding where he's more placed in the grid as well. But I think this could be a race where he does do well. It does seem like the last couple of tracks where it is more twisty corners, few hard braking zones, a few just smooth corners just seem to work for him quite well. And so you could be seeing another attack and another win here for Alexander Dimas. But I've just realised Tim Alders has just gone P2 and he's gotten quite close to Alexander Dimas.
There's a very competitive lap time from Tim Alders. And now we'll have to see, as I think finally starting a reasonable timed lap here from, how am I going to go ahead and say this name? Codoringolo, I think it is? I don't know.
We just call him Cordor.
Well, it'll be Codoringolo, I think. We'll go with, I think I'll get this down by the end of the evening. So Codor anyway is on his way, on his merry way around the first sector at the moment. Obviously his first lap was 17.2, which, as you can see by everybody else's times, is quite some way off the pace, so one would expect that he made a mistake and still finished that lap. Either which way, going to be looking to try and improve on that certainly here, and one would assume that he absolutely can do so, with that time being so far off the pace, and with how he's performed this season so far. I think that he'll have a little bit more up his sleeve. Yeah, already a 1.5 seconds up on that time at the moment. That would not really be too worrying if it weren't for the fact that there are some drivers at the moment who are very far abreast from him. So let's see if there's any more time to be gained in this final sector for Codorn, as he's going to round the final corner now and make that drive to the line. We'll see what he's got left in the locker. It is 3rd place with a 15.244, which is actually very respectable and starting to now bridge that gap between the 15.3 runners in Ian Van Unen and Frenek Morawake, and just trying to get towards those 2 aliens out front.
Yeah, definitely. Cordor, very good lap to have a comeback there. Very important as well, he is our championship leader. He is the only driver in the championship fight that hasn't won a race, but he is somehow leading the championship still. Only by, I believe, 1 point, but it's all you need. 1 point is the thing that makes the difference. We've seen that as we see one of the title contenders, Tax, go P4. Much improved lap, I believe, by about 10 positions there. So quite another good lap. Some of the drivers who struggled on their first laps, obviously coming through a bit more on their second or even their third and last runs there.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see a couple of people starting to exit the pits for their final runs as well. Currently Marvin Mur out on track for what I'm going to assume will be his final run, and Augustin Torlashi is out on track as well for what I'm going to assume will be their final run too. So, with the time remaining on the clock, it would be very difficult to get a good outlap, a timed lap, and a reasonably good in-lap in order to secure another run. Especially the other thing you've got to be consistent, or at least cognizant of, I should say, is that you have the tyres for it too, because short qualifying doesn't necessarily always allow the most wide range of tyre set usage.
Yeah, definitely. The drivers, like you said, I think also the drivers are in this tier. They have a lot of strategies. There's a lot of strategy differences as well from previous races. But there's a lot that some drivers do have to sort of gain back this season. One of the drivers who was up there is Franek Mowiak, if that's how you meant to say his name.
I'm going to go with Morawiak,
yeah. I've seen him in so many races, but I still can't say his name. But currently, he's down in 13th in the standings with only 8 points. And in his last 2 races, he's had DNFs, and he did miss Azerbaijan. So this could be a very important race for him. He needs to have a big comeback. Of course, qualifying so far has gone pretty well for him. But so far this season, he's been pretty much on the pace. He's been pretty close to the front. But this is where it needs to go. I think that's a Ferrari, if I'm correct.
That is a Ferrari that's just had a bit of a looping. Marvin Mur absolutely bottling that lap, unfortunately. And similarly, did his fellow outlapper at the same time, was Augustin Tolashi, was out on track and exceeded the track limits at the top of the hill. So ended up having to have that lap taken away from him as well. So we'll see what the strategy here for Marvin Moore and Torlashi is. Is it going to be go back into the pits and strap on a new set if you have one to spare? Or is it going to be just retire from the session and pick your poison, really, by starting all the way down in 19th and 17th, respectively? I think for Torlashi, he's going to have a second whack at this as he crosses the finish line to start what would be his final flying lap if he has got enough tyres and battery left.
I think he does. I think he should have enough, roughly. But very good line so far in the lap. He's actually, I have to say, very good line. Compared to me, he's about 3 times faster. But still coming up out of Sector 1, 300th improvement. This won't currently improve his position, I don't believe. Actually, no, it will. Oh, he's round. Oh, that was a big one there.
I think that was a missed the apex by a mile and then just carried on driving.
Yeah, just gave up from there.
Yeah, just threw in the towel.
But still a decent attempt though at a lap. I'm trying to find the next driver who's on that. I believe it will be Maloney who's going to be the next one. Yeah. He's had an extra warm-up lap, so he's going to be going for an extra run here. So here we go, coming up to the line. Let's see what Maloney can do on his final flying lap. Of course, a big championship contender at the moment. I believe he's 3rd in the championship, so it's going to be pretty big here. He's only P9, so ahead of Andres Lopez, which is very important, as we know, like we were talking about with the grid. As I just see on the mini-map, massive queues going on towards the end of the lap. This isn't going to help Maloney if they take long, these queues. He's gone too wide, though. That is it, I believe, for his qualifying. It will be, as it stands.
That probably will be it for Maloney, I'm afraid, at the end of that sector, getting himself that track limits invalidation. I think even Santa Maria is currently on a lap 2 that's about to be ending. Getting Alpha Tauri's dodging out of his way, and he's just about to get caught in the car park of the final sector. So I think for Santa Maria, we're not going to be seeing much by way of improvement here for him. He does get about nearly 2/10 improvement. Still only good enough for P14, and it could have been better, I imagine, if he wouldn't have been held up so aggressively by who else but actually Alexander Dimas, who's out at front at the moment. We'll keep on board with his lap because it's sure to be a banger if this first sector all goes according to plan. He's got it nicely tucked down to the apex. That's always a good sign. Taking as much corner as he can there to try and limit the track distance that he's got to cover. Now all to play for at the top of the hill. Take the risk or not? He has taken a bit, but it is calculated. Just 0.05 of a second down on his previously best time as well, which currently is good enough for pole position. But he still has something left in the locker, or at least he wants to try and show us that he does. As now he rounds into this second sector. Very twisty, very tight, but also still quite flowing and fun if you absolutely nail it. It's one of the most satisfying feelings in the world. As he now swings it right. Very, very fast corner. All the G's pushing on through. 200ths faster on that second sector. That's pulled his lap time back from what wouldn't have been an improvement to now potentially dropping into the 14s. We'll wait to see as now the final 2 corners are approaching. There's nobody going to be in his way as all the lap times are starting to come in. Tim Alders has bailed on his, and oh, big slide and a big spin from Alexander Dimas. He will not be getting into the 14s. That will be the end of his session. Franek does not manage to improve either. Tax will be the next person that we need to look at across the line, and he goes ahead of the Alfa Romeo and secures himself that second row.
Very good there from Cordor and Tax, like we said. But good laps from everybody. Got quite a bit closer to Alexander Dimas than I think he would have liked. Of course, he would have liked to improve on that last lap. I think that is it. I don't think the last driver is Ryan Grubb to cross the line, but he doesn't improve. But a great pole position from Alexander Dimas. He needed that, really. In this race, he really did need that. As about a 10th, that is pretty good. Of course, Cordor just broke inside of that 10th, which is slightly worrying for, I think, Dimas, as somebody was able to get that quite a bit closer. But good one from Cordor. Tim Alders as well, early lap time, but got it in quite early, but held on to P3. Tax. Very last minute, but it was a very good last minute lap, though, to pull himself up into the top 4. Once again, I think this has been his most average position was P4. I think he's done that most races.
Yeah. Well, consistency is king, as we mentioned before. But again, congratulations to Alexander Dimas for taking pole position. And as you mentioned at the very top of the show today, that qualifying here and grid position is going to be extremely important. So, I want to ask you a question. With such a big discrepancy at the top of the field in terms of who has got pole position and then the gap back to P2, do you think there's any chance that Alexander Dimas is running a more aggressive qualifying-based setup that may come back to hinder him in the race, but of course with it being difficult to overtake, might not really feel the repercussions of that? Or do you think he's just got the natural pace around here today?
It's difficult to say because we saw in the real life race at Hungary in 2022, we thought that was George Russell, but obviously it didn't happen. So I'm quite. It's very difficult to say because there's a bit of bad luck run of for most drivers who take pole, they don't score points for most of the drivers, or they don't get inside of the top 5. So there's this sort of bad luck run at the moment. But I do think if Dimas can keep this pace up, and he hasn't gone with too much of an aggressive setup, he should be fine. But he has got that risk from Cordell, who possibly is running a less aggressive setup.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems that we're actually getting right into the action. It's 5 red lights and we're off to the races. As Alexander Dimas gets away well from P1. Kodalinga, oh, how am I going to say this? He's pushing him over anyway. Kodaringolo is getting pushed over to the wall, but it's still been held position for Alexander Dimas. In on the inside is Tax in the Red Bull, trying to slot in past the sister AlphaTauri, but the Mercedes of Tim Alders manages to hold strong around the outside and holds on to that P3. So Kodaringolo still holds on to P2. There's plenty of action going down on the back of the field here. Drivers shuffling and jostling for position. I don't think we've lost anybody out of the mix just yet, but it's all starting to filter out at the front. There's plenty of drivers towards the middle and the back of the field who are all trying to go 2 abreast through the top of the hill and then round the outside. But for the time being, everything is looking stationary until that's an Alfa Romeo that's gone off on the track. It's Danico, the Brit, has just span at the top of the corner, and unfortunately that's going to be his race looking a little bit worse for wear now. He's still yet to get going and now finally gets his way up to the chicane. That's going to be a dire start for the Briton, but either way, we're off for everybody else, and Danico has a lot of work to do.
Jack Dan is off. Jack Dan is also off. He was spun around by, I believe that was Tolashi or possibly Marvin Murphy. I didn't catch who it was. Danico, by the way, does have wing damage as well. I'm not sure about Jack Dan. I don't think he does, but he might have some body damage though, which is, of course, even worse.
Yeah, if it's rear wing damage, that's pretty critical.
As I see a move between Drax and Lucas Eduardo into turn 1. Drax has gone for the soft. So has he gone for the aggressive 2-stop strategy, try to get up the grid early? But I would say that is quite risky. And there is another car round. It's Dustin Vincent. So many people spinning.
Yeah, it's difficult, very difficult to get the tyres up to temperature on these opening laps, but I'd have said it would be more the case that the hard tyre runners would be suffering, not Dustin Vincent, who as a matter of fact has started this race on those yellow banded Pirellis to try and make up some places. I don't know what's happening here for Drax though. I've never seen a soft strategy. Is he going to try and go for a 2-stopper, or is he looking to extend all the way to a hard to finish this race out? I have no idea. We'll wait to see how this one plays out, but the progress he's going to be making is surely going to be very limited. He's going to be held up massively through all of these sectors because there's so few opportunities for overtaking. So I'm really confused as to what's happening here for Drax, and he's not going to make any audacious sends in towards the end of the final sector. So this will be a weird strategy, to say the least. I mean, at the moment, let's have a look. He's currently up 9 places, so off the line he managed to get an absolute shift put in. But for the time being, I mean, Dustin Vincent and, of course, Danico down 11 places each. And there it is for Kodaringolo. He's managed to lock horns with Alexander Dimas at the front, trading fastest laps. And now there is Drax making his way up his 10th position in on those soft tyres, up into 6th place.
Very good overtake there. Quite a simple one. Drax did go a bit deep though, but like you were saying, a very strange strategy from the Mercedes of WOR Drax, but he is, I have to say, he is putting in the work and he is gaining the position. So, as we said though, this track isn't the easiest to overtake on, so he might be thinking about that he might be able to hold up some drivers throughout most of the lap as tyre wear increases with the soft. So that is part of it, but like we saw with the mediums, they overheat quite easily, and that's another car round. That is Dustin Vincent once again on the mediums. But yeah, as I was saying, Drax might be working on that idea of that he might be trying to go for something like holding up the drivers behind of whoever is behind, but he has got the problem of overheating, because we were talking about that, and the softs are prone, especially on this year's game, and also this year in real life in F1. The tyres do overheat, and he's also used a lot of ERS early on, and here he goes on Ian Van Unen, as we say about that, up into P5 now. So is he going just for turn 1 moves, possibly, trying to keep it safe?
Well, I think almost certainly at the moment, while he's got these soft tyres beneath him and they're still working, he has to make hay whilst the sun shines. Because ultimately, I think the drivers around him know, they can see that he's on those soft tyres, and they're going to be more than happy just to let him by, because they don't want really to, A, hold him up, because he could be an asset to dragging them up to the next car if there is a big gap between the two of them. And B, well, they don't really want to have a fight with him unnecessarily either, because that means that they'll end up slowing themselves down. So not really fighting it and letting that soft tyre runner go, knowing ultimately that he's on a completely different strategy to you, would probably be the wise thing to do here. And so far, I think that almost everybody that Drax has come into contact with has really gone ahead with that strategy too. Up to the front, though, there's not really much change going on at the moment. I expect this is where we'll see things start to settle down until the pit stop phase, really. We won't see many driver changes or overtakes or anything like that. We'll be pretty much sticking in the wheel tracks and getting a feel for what everybody else is doing with their battery, how everybody else's tyres are going until you feel you've got an advantage. Then maybe we'll start to see some moves in a couple of laps' time.
Yes, definitely. Like you said, maybe not so many moves, but as I know this tier, it's so unpredictable. As we saw Cordor go for almost like a fake dive there. See if he could put Alexander Dimas offline. As Dustin Vincent is our first retiree of this race. He has retired in the pits, so it's not driver mistake or something else that has caused that. So one driver sadly already out of the race. Yeah, it's quieted down slightly, which is quite nice for us as commentators. But as I see Ian Van Noonen makes a big mistake, and here goes Fanik Moiak on for the move.
Oh no.
But he has lost that position as he's down to P10, so not what he wanted there. From my point of view, I'm not sure who was it wrong. We know that's quite a tight corner, quite a tight set of 2 corners there. Not sure if that could have given some body damage to Ian Van Noonen. It might have. But yeah, that's quite difficult to say who was at fault. It's going to need to be more seen by the stewards, of course, from each driver's point of view. But from Franik's point of view, I would currently say that Ian Van Noonen sort of gave almost all of the space, but just a little too little there, really, for Franik. But yeah, that was a quite odd spin. It wasn't like purposely purposely cutting him off there.
Yeah, it was certainly a bit of an odd situation, but speaking of odd situations that are currently unfolding, Ryan Grob making a move on Candy King that time around, just about caught it. Also in the background, just about caught an absolutely massive slide out of the final corner from Maloney. Really did not want that rear of the Ferrari to comply with him at all there. Just did not want to stick with him under acceleration. So he's struggling a little bit there with pace. Obviously, Franek Morowiak is going to be stuck behind Andre Lopez now as well, just behind in 9th place. So this is going to end up being a little bit of a train if Ian Van Unen can't get up to the back of those leading 5 at the moment. But it seems for the time being, at the very least, he's made that progress back on up, or is getting very close back into that 1 second window for the DRS detection zone down the front straight. I also think that part of that might be because now we're about to get to that point where Drax's red banded soft tyres are about to be falling off quite dramatically. I just saw him miss the apex there of the second to last corner by a mile. So maybe this is getting to the point now where these tyres are feeling less than okay.
Yeah, definitely. I suspect he's going to try and maybe go to lap 12, maybe 15 on these softs, which is going to be very difficult. But as you were saying, Maloney, big slide. But can we just take a minute and have a look? We've got Lucas Eduardo, Maloney, and Andres Lopez all in this line, and they're all championship contenders, especially the 2 drivers of Andres Lopez and Maloney, who are 2nd and 3rd in the championship. And they're Maloney just in front of Andres Lopez. So it's going to be quite interesting on if these guys have an on-track battle, because I believe this could be a battle for position in the championship as well, and also just overall for points in the championship for them, as of course Andres Lopez wants to take the lead of the championship, but at the moment he won't. It will be Corridor to even stretch his lead even more out front by currently, I believe it would be about 16 points more out in the lead, which would be a massive lead. So up to 17 points altogether as it stands.
Yeah, Kodoringolo here is going to be very, very happy, rubbing his hands together, of course, because currently on his timing tower that he has on the top of the screen, he'll see as far back as 5th position, and he won't see any of the names that he's in contention with in those 5 slots around him. So he'll know that he's going to be making some big points gains if the flag were to come out now against his championship rivals. And that, I don't know whether he'd be particularly opportunistic and want to try and make up some more points by taking on Alexander Dimas, but so far Dimas is controlling this race very, very well from the front, not letting himself get flustered, not letting himself get completely put under pressure as well by Kodoringolo up front. And he's just kind of managing this one for the time being. Pure management mode, no need to take any risks. I do want to have a quick conversation with you though about that exact thing that's just popped up at the top of the screen. Track limits warnings on this track are actually fairly common. Obviously fast corners that can understeer you, especially if your tyres are going off, which I think Drax is starting to discover now. How are these going to affect our race here? We're going to end up seeing a lot of 3-second time penalties, I'll imagine.
Yeah, definitely. So far it's been pretty clean for it, but out of the corner that the leaders have just come out of, and also I believe it's turn 5, I believe it is. It could be turn 4 or 5, but the fast left-hander as well, very much known for track limits, and it's big problems there. But I'm quite surprised no one has had an issue. Drax is going to the pits quite early.
Yeah, I think
didn't expect it to be this early.
Yeah, I'm not sure what his strategy is going to be here, to be honest with you. I'm going to assume this is going to force him into a 2-stop, unless he's going to make these hards work forever. I really don't see how they're going to last a full, 25 laps, really, at this point, 26 laps. So this is going to be a Herculean effort from Drax if he wants to get to the end on these tyres, and he's definitely going to have to drive considerably more conservatively than he has been doing so far in this race. One would really hope that maybe he has a bit of pace on these and it can hold other people up when the pace discrepancy won't be so bad. But we'll see what happens. We'll keep our eye on Drax's progress at the back of the field, but of course already accruing that 3-second time penalty isn't really going to help things for him. Speaking of not really having things helped for him as well, Ian Van Unen, is currently 1.4 seconds back of Tax, obviously with that pesky Mercedes on the soft tyres that was in the way before in the shape of Drax. He's ended up losing quite a fair amount of time because Drax's tyres were starting to fall off. And as such now, he is clean outside of that DRS and also cleanly under threat from Lucas Eduardo behind.
Yeah, also he's used quite a lot of VIS. Look at just the drivers around him, all at least above 30% for the drivers around him. And Ian Van Unen is out to VRS right now. So things aren't being helped, and you can see into turn 1, like we were saying earlier about how little ERS you can gain around this track, only 3% into turn 1. Things aren't really being helped there for Ian Van Unen. As we know, you lose quite a lot of power when you don't have any ERS left, and so that could be the problem for him. But also, like we were saying, it's not an easy track to pass drivers anyway without having quite a lot of straight line speed, like we saw from Drax earlier on, who was making moves quite quickly because of faster tyres or even just using a lot of ERS. So that is going to be the thing that I think Ian Van Unen does have. But anyway, he is catching Tax as it stands. He's caught him by about 2/10, who is currently battling with Tim Alders slightly.
Yeah, I think that's not to be too unexpected. When you get a bit of clear air and you can settle into it, especially in the case of Ian Van Unen at the moment, he's got both of those things and a bit of time to settle into them. You'll end up naturally catching those ahead of you or having to brake that little bit earlier to avoid rear-ending the driver they're following so closely. And in Tax's case, that is Tim Alders, like you mentioned. And they're starting to get a little bit closer together now. Tim Alders is also just still hanging onto the coattails, really, of Kodoringolo and Alexander Dimas in front. So let's maybe start to see these front 4 positions spread out a tad, maybe, if Codaringolo is going to maintain the same pace that Alexander Dimas is currently showing us too. So we'll keep our eye on that little front thing. We'll also keep our eye on Ian Van Unen, but I'm really interested now to see whether the lack of DRS on Van Unen and of course the lack of ERS, as you mentioned, is going to start to entice Lucas Eduardo into maybe making a bit of a move or starting to mount a bit of an assault. At the moment, though, he looks like he's just comfortably driving in Van Unen's wheel tracks and not really looking to make anything too aggressive happen.
Yeah, currently that is pretty good, but remember, these drivers don't know what each other's ERS levels, of course. Ian Van Unen has that flashing light on the back of his car to say that he has less than 10% ERS. But other than that, it's quite difficult to tell if a driver has it, because if you look to the front of the grid, we've got Cordor and Alexander Dimas both over 90%, further back, both over 50%, so it's quite difficult. But I do give it to Van Unen. He is catching up. He's caught up by about another 0.2 in the last lap, so he is actually keeping up, but it's just the straight line speed is quite weak. But it doesn't look like Lucas Eduardo is in a rush to move up the grid. I think he's just using him for DRS at the moment.
No, but at the front there are 2 people at the front, sorry to cut you off, who are in a rush to try and get ahead. Codaringolo was looking for a move around the outside of Alexander Dimas into turn 1, and Tax was also playing chicken with Tim Alders as well as to whether he was going to move out of the slipstream. He later did and then didn't go for the move in the end, but they're both looking very racy now at the front. I'm not sure whether it's because we're starting to come towards the pit window, so drivers are going to start wanting to use a bit more life out of these hard Pirelli tyres, but the front 4 are keeping up that pace to maintain the gap to Ian Van Unen behind, and they're also now starting to squabble a tad, at least towards the end of that final sector. We were definitely seeing Codaringolo putting the screws to Alexander Dimas a fair amount, and Tax was looking to try and do the exact same thing to Tim Alders. So we'll keep an eye on it this time around to see whether they're going to go for it again, whether that first attempt was really a dress rehearsal, or whether it was just them getting a little bit too close for comfort. It is much more spread out this time around, though, so maybe we'll just see things calm back down for a little bit. One attempt was too much. Everybody's blood pressure got a little bit too high, everyone got too worried, and now they're just going to go and take it chill for a little lap.
Yeah, it's nice for us. We don't have to speak really quickly. I did just see a move happen between Tristan and Ivan Santa Maria. Santa Maria, though, coming back through to regain his position, but he is below 10% ERS, and Tristan does see that. But I just want to talk about a driver who this season has been a bit unlucky, but has still done all right. It's Jack Dan. He's scored in 33 points. He got his first podium in the last race in Belgium, but he's down in P16. I know he got spun out, but it's quite odd that he hasn't caught up yet. He's caught up by only about 3-4 seconds. So it's not a huge amount of sort of tracking back, especially for where he qualified as well, which I think was around P7, P8. So possibly he's just struggling a bit for race pace, or is it possibly because he's got body damage?
It could well be. I did see him reverse or back into the wall when he had his accident too. So I wouldn't be too surprised if there maybe is something going wrong with that car in a way, and it does just affect the balance. Of course, such an aerodynamically sensitive circuit, the Hungaroring. I'll get my words out eventually. The Hungaroring being so aerodynamically sensitive, just the tiniest modicum of body damage can generally really affect the way that you have to drive the car, and can really also affect the amount of pace that you're able to carry. It's often most indicative through that second sector, and then through this final sector, his setup seems to be quite good at pulling him back towards the rears of Augustin Tolashi ahead of him. But for the time being, yeah, not much progress really being made, which is quite sad to see for the season that Jack Dan has so far.
It does look like I can pretty much say with almost certainty it does look like he does have floor damage. Although it looks minor, it might be worse. But as we know on this game, the slight bit of floor damage, you're going to be losing maybe at least 2-3 tenths a lap, which is the one downside I think to a lot of sim racers on this year's game. But talking about a driver who's sort of keeping up after maybe getting a bit of damage, and also having a bit of a damaging race for him mentally, is Franek Moriak, who is still P9, but he's held on to it and he's kept good pace after his tangle with, I believe it was Ian Van Noonen.
Yes.
And so, I have to say, he's had a pretty decent recovery to be able to not sort of be shaken by that too much and to keep going. It's quite different from some of the other drivers we've seen here.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I also want to give a quick shout out as well to the man behind him, Ryan Grob, who's managed to not only battle past Candy King and now drop him by 3 seconds, but also get himself onto the back of this little leading group that's now started to emerge, as Ian Van Oonen has in fact got himself back into the DRS of the leading four. So this, what was a foursome, has now become a 10-some, I suppose you would say, because there's now 10 drivers all the way up in this biznaz, as Ryan Grob, of course, has recovered all the way to the back of this group. So interesting progress from Ryan Grob so far, and he is currently very, very close to Franek Morawiak in front of him. So I would not be surprised if we see Ryan Grob being a little more aggressive. He's got the hot hand at the moment, seems to be putting in some relatively consistent laps, and also being quite quick about it when he's doing them. So let's keep our eye on the Alpine's progress for the time being. Of course, up the front of this little 4 cars ahead of him, he's got Lucas Eduardo, his teammate. Not that teammates really mean too much in a solo racing league, but, you know, it's always nice to have that constructors thing tied up too.
Yeah, of course. I think the difference is between Ryan Grob and Lucas Eduardo is, first of all, Ryan Grob this season, I have to give it to him, you know, he got a podium in Baku. He did DNF in the last race, but I do give it to him, though. He's a very strong driver. I know him as well, so that's part of it. I'm not just saying it because of that. I think it's also because he's also seen as a driver who is growing quite quickly, as well in the sim racing community. From last season to this season, he's found a lot more pace, and he is showing some promise out there. And like you said, in this race especially, he's really had a big comeback from a mediocre qualifying, shall we say.
Yeah, so he started down in P14 at the moment, I think I would say. He's currently up 4 places, so doing a relatively good job. Tippable, I think is what I'd call it. Tippable performance so far from Ryan Grob, but of course we are just about to cross over the threshold in a few laps' time of to half race distance, so we'll start to see whether he can do anything on these medium tyres. His pace on these hard compound tyres has been nothing short of sensational, and he's currently just a meager 0.2 of a second behind the Alfa Romeo in front. So let's see whether he's going to mount anything this time around. I don't think there's going to be any massive battery discrepancies, and as Franek Morawiak in front has a DRS connection to Andres Lopez, I don't think we'll be seeing anything for the time being. Candy King is also going to be the first of these hard runners to drop into the pit lane. So we're about to hit that pit stop change window. Are we going to see people diving in early to make advantage of those fresh mediums and get that undercut on the drivers around them? Or are we going to see people going a bit longer to make sure they have those medium tyres still underneath them at the end of the race?
I think a bit longer. I think you should have gone a bit longer, because I think there's a possible chance that Candy King is waiting for a safety car, because if he's going to mediums now, that means he's got to last longer on the mediums than he has on the hards, and that's a very difficult thing to do around this track. Especially the fact that mediums on a 50% race should only last around 15 laps at the sort of at decent pace. It's going to be a bit of a struggle for him to sort of reclaim much time. Later on, he might actually lose more position than he gains. But also, can we just go back to the battle in front? Because Tax has caught up to Tim Alders quite a bit, and he was about 8 tenths off now. He's within 4 tenths, and is he going for it? I don't think he is, because there's 2 cars in the pits.
He's at least deploying a little bit of ERS down that front straight there, dangerously close into the braking zone with the accordion effect, but either way, works well, and is keeping himself, I think, just in the pocket, really, I think is what you'd call it for Tax at the moment. I think it's more than okay just to kind of yo-yo out of touch with Tim Alders a little bit, just to give yourself some breathing room. I think when you're also following very closely, whilst the effects of it on this game aren't quite as realistic as they would be in real life, you do get some slightly warmer tyres from some of the hot air coming off the back of the car in front, but I think it's still at least minor changes in terms of car performance with that on this game. despite it not being quite as realistic as it otherwise could be. But for Tax here, I think he's going to be very aware of that. He's just playing the game, really, and I don't mean that as in like he's quite literally just playing F122. I mean that he's playing the strategy game, he's playing the tactical game, the waiting game as well. He knows at the moment there's no point in doing anything crazy. Maybe in a couple of laps' time when we start to see those pit stops coming on in that we've been talking about and anticipating for so long, maybe that's when we'll see him do something. But he has all the cards in his hand at the moment. He has some pretty decent pace on these hard tyres. He has Tim Alders under pressure. In fact, he has Tim Alders losing DRS to the cars in front as well. Not that he's going to be close enough on this occasion, but that's going to give an air of desperation for Tim Alders here that may be something that Tax can pounce upon maybe next time round, because he's not going to be close enough on this occasion.
But you know what? Who this is actually really helping? Tim Alders has dropped out of DRS. From is actually Cordor. This is really helping him because it's almost like he's now lost the pressure from Tim Alders, as we see a big mistake from Alexander Dimas. No, I'm not having any favoritism here or anything, but I do think Cordor is gonna go for it in the next few laps, or maybe when the pit stops happen, or maybe just before them, because he's getting very close to Alexander Dimas, and I do feel like Dimas, whenever he's been towards the front, he does sometimes come under the pressure. Not in the last 2 races, he hasn't so much, but he has had these little moments where you felt like he's gotten quite close to the edge, where he's almost spun it, or he's almost hit the wall or something. So he's got to be very careful here, as Cordor's pulling the trigger first to go straight into the pits on lap 19, same as Tim Alders and Ian Van Oonen, but Alexander Dimas and Tax will be staying out for possibly an extra lap or two if they want to. Do you think that's going to be an advantage between staying out a lap later?
With how hard it is to overtake, maybe just getting that undercut in early would be the better outcome for Codder and Golo here. Maybe that's what he's thinking. I can hold on these tyres. And, well, your good mate Ryan Grob went in a lap before everybody else and is currently making some steady progress. We can see that he has come out ahead of Ian Van Oonen. And that is exceptional, because the Mercedes both are having a bit of a tussle. Let's keep our eye on that just a bit further down, if I can actually get the right director. Oh dear, wow, that is going all kinds of wrong. Ryan Grob has now slot himself in the middle between Drax and Tim Alders. Of course, Drax on those old, hard tyres. Now Tim Alders is hot back ahead. Ryan Grob on those medium tyres has made up spades of time if you compare him to Tim Alders here. And he's going to go again because, of course, his tyres are warm, whereas Tim Alders' tyres are still that little bit too cold for them to be in that perfect operating window. Ryan Grob, however, has used a fair amount of his ERS already, so let's not get it too twisted here, because this could mean that he could be under attack later on in the race if he doesn't have the tyres and the ERS beneath him. Now, of course, Tim Alders' tyres should theoretically have heated up, but that is a masterstroke from Ryan Grob thus far. We'll see how it ends up paying off in the long run.
Let's see. Our race leader, Alexander Dimas. There he goes. He's had his pit stop. He's coming out. Let's see. Is he going to come out, though, in front of Jack Dan or not? No, he isn't. He will be stuck behind more of a back marker in this race, Jack Dan, and he's also going to be a lot closer to Cordor as well, so he hasn't really gained much time, Alexander Dimas, from that either, so it hasn't helped. Look at how much time Cordor is catching up. He's going to go for it. I'm pretty sure he's going to go for it here. Yes, he is. He is going for it.
Oh, it's defensive.
He stopped slightly. Oh, very close.
Tough.
We might be seeing a clip submitted to the stewards after that, as you know, due to a late move. That was quite a late move from Alexander Dimas. Maybe a bit of almost an emergency move, being a bit scared into the corner. But now the only driver not to pit so far this race is Lucas Eduardo, who's still out there going for another lap. As Andres Lopez is going in. Drax has retired. It's on track, though. It looks like he might have spun it. Yeah, he spun it. He has spun it. This is going to help, though, Andres Lopez. And it's bad luck for Lucas Eduardo, because he's now stuck. I'm not sure what's going to actually happen here, because he's in front of the safety car.
Will he get to just lap it. Yeah, he will. He'll just get to go out ahead.
Yeah.
There's going to
But
be...
Andres Lopez.
What a profit that is. What a sensational amount of profit. Andre Lopez has just been gifted. Everyone's going to go past the safety car because the leader already has, as far as I'm aware. So Andre Lopez has just been gifted a race-winning position on tyres that are going to be a couple of laps fresher than most of his competitors around him. And in a position where now, Andres Lopez, after being nowhere throughout the course of this race, qualifying poorly, getting bogged down in the DRS trains in the midfield, is now going to be in a position where he may be able to steal his third race in a row.
Possibly, but there is a slight risk though. He has got Lucas Eduardo still yet to pit, so we'll see where he comes out because he might still be leading this race, which will be the big part to it. But he's still got a very fast Alexander Dimas and Cordor to get by because remember, Andres Lopez so far this race, I wouldn't say he's had the pace to be out front. He hasn't particularly been catching them. He's actually been losing about, by looking at how it says in lap times, it's been about a tenth, maybe 2/10 slower per lap than the leaders. And so he might actually lose out towards, well, quite quickly after the safety car. But let's see where Lucas Eduardo comes out. He might actually come out into the lead.
He has. Lucas Eduardo has come out into the lead. And what looked like, for Codringolo, a race in which that he might not have too much threat from many of his championship competitors. All of a sudden, he is very quickly surrounded by them because of Drax's little spin that has caused a full safety car here at the Hungaroring. So mid-race drama that has now spoiled the party for Codringolo.
Yeah, definitely massive thing for Lucas Eduardo as well because he was the first driver to win this season, if anyone remembers that. He currently sits, I think he'll be sitting about 5th in the championship, 5th or 6th. So he's got some sort of ground to gain again, but this is what he needs. Fresh mediums. Nobody else has pitted this lap, so he's the only driver with these fresh mediums. But still, like I said before, Lucas Eduardo and Andres Lopez so far this race hasn't shown, neither of them has shown that they've got the pace to really battle with Alexander Dimas or Cordor. And, I'm not being mean to Tim Alders or Tax, but neither have they either. They've always been about a tenth or two off of the leaders. And so, there could be a bit of battling going on here, which could help a driver that we were talking about just a few minutes ago, Ryan Grob.
Yeah. Yeah, what we thought was previously an absolute masterstroke from Ryan Grob, where he went onto the tyres much earlier than everybody else, or at least the front runners, has ended up being, well, not quite so impressive now that there's been a couple of people who've massively profited from this safety car. But still, impressive nonetheless. And the good thing about a safety car for a young and keen driver like Ryan Grob is that when there are a number of drivers around you who are all trying to warm up their tyres, you might be able to catch them sleeping at the restart and gain a few positions for free.
But he's also got to warm his tyres, so he's got that,
true.
that one issue. As we see Marvin Murd, the Ferrari, a driver that I believe is a reserve, who has stepped in for this race. Very quiet for the Ferrari driver. Very quiet from a few drivers like Marvin Murd, the Red Bull of Snatch, and also I think Candy King, who I'm used to him making quite a bit of noise on track, not just from his car, but also from some of his results. Although he's had back-to-back P6s in the last 2 races, it just makes me think, what's happened to him this race? He's been sitting P11 this whole race, same as Maloney, who's been sitting P10. So it's been a bit of a lonely race. For a lot of the drivers, I think P11 and downwards, it's been a bit of a lonely race, not much action going between them. They seemed a lot more spread out than the front guys.
Yeah, it does. Interesting, though, how this one is going to pan out now. The safety car is coming in this lap. This is where now Drivers are going to want to try and get their burnouts in to heat their rear tyres up because the safety car coming in for some reason, and I still don't understand why, truthfully, limits the amount of acceleration that you can put on through the game. I don't know why, it just does that. So just be careful on that rear pedal for the time being and get those tyres up to temp. Weave to your heart's content, boys, but don't get too close to each other. Don't want to be getting any 5-second time penalties for collisions under the safety car. It looks like Lucas Eduardo has pulled the trigger very, very early on here. Didn't even wait till the final corner to get going. Waited till the penultimate, and he has made a mean getaway as he's currently now over 0.7 of a second ahead of Alexander Dimas, who's now looking to try and go on in. Tristan, unfortunately, has got a yellow 5-second penalty for ignoring yellow flags. Tim Alders violently defends from Tax, who is again looking to mount an assault on his race-long rivals so far. But everybody has held position off the restart. The gaps are starting to spread out a little bit, depending on who's got their tyres heated up to the max. And then we'll see when things settle down where everybody pans out.
The one driver who's lost out most out of anybody is Ian Van Unen, currently down in 13th. He's lost out 7 positions this race.
It's not a fun time for Van Unen. Also, must have lost out horribly on the safety car restart as Tax has actually just tried to put a move on Tim Alders here. They're side by side at the moment, still sticking with it. Tim Alders forced to yield as they go into the left-hander, and Tax has made a move in a very unconventional piece of track for making overtakes into that very narrow chicane. Nearly loses the rear as well at the start of the third sector. Tax is really driving this car to the best of his ability at the moment, trying to leave it all out there on the track. And now Tim Alders is vulnerable to Ryan Grubb behind, who's having a little bit of a sniff, as a matter of fact. Ryan Grubb may even be looking for a move here, as Tim Alders does not seem to have the pace exactly on these medium tyres at the moment. Something's got him flustered, or at the very least, something's got him struggling, as Ryan Grubb is right in the wheel tracks, trying to benefit from that slipstream, but Tim Alders just has enough. Later on the brakes, trying to go around the outside. Not going to have everything. The rear of the car steps out from underneath Ryan Grubb, and as such, he has to concede that fight with Alders to live to fight another day.
Yeah, disappointing one there for Ryan Grubb, wanting to pick up on the mistake of Tim Alders, but still a pretty clean getaway. No massive issues early on, which is always nice to have. But there is some drivers who do need to make moves soon, and that's Cordor, who's currently about second off of his teammate. And as it stands, Cordor will lose the lead of the championship here. And I think that's the biggest battle that currently is on track, that this is over the championship here. And I did expect to be saying that in this race, that there is an actual chance of the championship being changed. But also, we've got drivers like Alexander Dimas and Lucas Eduardo, who their seasons haven't been perfect, but they're both quite fast drivers, and they're proving that here. And I was wrong. Lucas Eduardo and Andres Lopez are both showing some really good pace.
Yeah, more so Lucas Eduardo for sure, because Andres Lopez is currently losing touch in terms of DRS to the drivers out ahead of him. But interestingly, so is Koda Ringolo. He's over a second back of Andre Lopez, so I'm not particularly sure what's happening here for Koda Ringolo. Maybe he just hasn't got the pace on these medium tyres. At the very least now, we are starting to enter the closing phases of this race at the Hungaroring, and it is still all to play for. Andres Lopez has really put the hammer down on this lap specifically, because he's now closing up and taking time out of Alexander Dimas, hand over fist at the very least through that first sector. Made it into that DRS range now by nearly 0.4 of a second, so he's starting to feel a little bit more comfortable, and it would appear so is Koda Ringolo. So as soon as we start to question whether the pace is really there for the two Alpha Tauris, they start to show up to the party. But as for Tax and Tim Alders, they are also spreading out a bit here. The medium tyres not really giving us the same amount of close racing as we had from the harder compound tyre early on.
Definitely no. Cordor's back within a second though. Important thing there for him. But the big battle here is who's going to win this lead for the races. Andres Lopez is finding himself back into the battle as well. Cordor's finding his way back as well, and so is Tax. So quite a lot of drivers, but the one driver who has lost out quite heavily is Tim Alders, currently down in P6. A bit more under threat from Ryan Grubb, Tim Alders has under 10% ERS and is almost out of ERS entirely. So he is under threat from Ryan Grob. But I don't know what's happened to Tim Alders. He had such good pace earlier. It just seems like he's, not to put it sort of in a bad way, but bottled it slightly with ERS and possibly pace slightly. Maybe it's the pressure getting to him. We know he's a good driver. I think we all know that. To be able to race in this tier, you have to be good. He's only scored 16 points this season, so he's a fair way off of the leaders. This race will still be big for his championship, but he does need to reel back in tax if he really wants to have a chance at the podium. But as it stands, I wouldn't say he does.
Yeah, it's going to definitely be a big, big mountain to climb. And for Ian Van Unen, whose race was looking... Oh, dear. What a shame for Ian Van Unen. His race was looking good. Then he got a bit of an altercation with Franek Morawiecki.
Safety car.
Oh, no. How? Has he crashed on the pit straight? Or I thought he was in the pit lane. Dear, oh, dear.
No,
okay, safety car.
Another one. But this is going to be good for Cordall, though, because he's going to be very happy with this.
Well, I'm starting to think whether maybe people might be considering going to a different tyre compound here. Maybe the soft tyre. The difficulty with that is, of course, because the field is already still so close together, being the first person to pull the pin on that soft tyre may just end up losing you a load of positions that you can't really get back. So we may just see everybody stick on the mediums. That's the other way of thinking about this one. Yeah. Sadly, the soft tyre would be a nice little gambit for everybody to go for at the end, but I don't think we're going to see it.
I think we might, but I think it will more come from possibly a driver like Alexander Dimas, possibly some of the more front runners, because I think drivers like Maloney, Franek, Morawiecki, and Ryan Grob want to gain positions, not lose out any. But who knows? A late safety car, of course, it always makes it difficult, and we don't know what anybody's going to do because it's so unpredictable, as we know. But let's have a look. Is anybody going to go into the pits? I'm trying to see. Andres Lopez trying to fake it into the pits. But he doesn't. I don't think anybody is going in. No, somebody is. It's Candy King.
Snatch. Okay, I suppose that's not too unexpected, realistically. People who are at the back or maybe not inside the points, what have you got to lose by diving into the pit lane, realistically? You have a chance to at least get yourself into the points, or more of a chance than you would have had initially anyway. So, sure, go for it. Give it a whirl. Maybe there will come something good of it.
It would have been really exciting if the leaders had gone in. That would have been such an exciting end. But you don't always get what you want. But I'm happy with it, though. But this is, although I have to say, this does mean there's a bit of a new battle going on. Candy King's gone to the mediums, so I'm not sure what he's doing. But everybody else has gone to the soft. So, can we see this a sort of emerging battle for the edges of the top 10? The sort of lower points, maybe P8 lower from drivers like Candy King, because they might try and go for early moves. I'm just hoping the safety car goes in on this lap so we can get some battling.
I think if I'm not wrong, it won't be in this lap, but it may be in the next. The game makes it so anyway that there are at least 3 laps worth of racing. So irrespective of whether the safety car comes out on lap 32, it'll go in on lap 33, for example, I think. If it comes out on 31, it'll go out on 32. So either way, we'll have at least 3 laps of racing towards the end of this race, but any more than that might be a little bit touch and go at the moment. We haven't had the notification at the start of Sector 3 that the safety car was going to be in this lap, so we'll have another lap under the safety car.
Yes. But yeah, as we were saying, this track, I don't think we've spoken about it enough because I think it's an underrated track, but it's also one of the most difficult. I think that's why it's underrated. But it's proving today with a lot of the drivers that it is a difficult track, that it isn't the easiest to predict for strategy or anything. But yeah, what do you think?
I think Hungary is one of those tracks that's quite easy to drive initially, but it's very, very difficult to master. Very difficult to nail because you've got so many fast apexes. You have to be inch perfect on them, really, and it's much harder to be inch perfect when you're driving at a much higher speed and relying on the physics of the car to get you by. So yeah, I think there's an element of that with it. I think it is, like you say, a pretty difficult track, all things considered. But yeah, one of my favourites, really. I think it's quite well rated. I think people know what they're going to expect, but it is exceptionally fun to drive. Maybe not so fun to watch in many years worth of real-life Formula 1 racing, or even just Grand Prix or GT racing, or different disciplines of motor racing generally. Hungaroring doesn't necessarily present the best racing, but I think from a technical element, I think it's a necessary addition to the Formula 1 calendar, because you've got to have some races that test your ability to be a little bit more creative with your overtakes, or bide your time and keep it all together over a lap. I think tyre management also on this track is one which I find extremely interesting from that perspective. And often, the Hungaroring can also play host to a bit of weather problems too, which always makes for good racing. So, safety car in this lap anyway, which means we will be getting things underway, and we will be seeing everybody weaving frantically down this very short back straight and into those final 2 corners. So, as everybody starts to try and get some heat into their Pirellis, we'll see what the crack is amongst these guys. Oh, they're going to be going side by side to try and restart this race. If this were real life, that would not be allowed.
Yeah, but okay, early prediction, who do you think is going to win? I've got to know.
It's too hard to call right now anyway, and it's going to be too soon for us to make any comment about it, because Lucas Eduardo is firing away once again. Out the front he goes, Freestyler, as he's absolutely dropping Alexander Dimas behind. He got him, caught him napping just a little bit, but further back down the field, Tax looks like he's under pressure, or at least fighting, actually, Kodor N'Golo. He's side by side with him. They're having a bit of a scrap. It's all to play for, and Tax is now going to have to go around the outside because Kodor N'Golo has the inside line. He yields to try and get back for another bite of the cherry later on, but at least setting his intentions out early there for Tax. We'll keep our eyes also down the field on the drivers who are on those soft compound tyres to see if they have anything particularly special to offer. But at the moment at the front, Alexander Dimas is pushing Lucas Eduardo, keeping the gap back to Andres Lopez. It was almost up to a second there just at the end of the first sector, but for the time being it's starting to come back down. Drivers starting to find their place, cooling off now they haven't made their first overtaking opportunity stick. They're just going to try and settle in, but they don't have much more time left to do it.
No, they don't. They've really got to find something very quickly here. I do think Lucas Eduardo's going to be under a lot of pressure, especially on the last lap or two when there's DRS. Oh, big slide from Alexander Dimas now coming out of the last corner. We'll see all of the cars wrapping round very nicely out of the last corner. Not much going on though, going on straight, no DRS just yet, but Lucas Eduardo does miss the apex slightly, but you see different racing lines from all of the drivers as we see further back, Snatch making up some positions to go up to P12, so a good move from the Red Bull, but it's all coming down to these last couple of laps between one of the biggest battles, Kodor and Andres Lopez fighting over the championship lead.
Yeah, they actually are. The two Alpha Tauris both squabbling at the top of the championship and also for that final step on the podium at the moment. Kodor N'Golo not really able to make the progress that he was looking for off the restart because he immediately came under threat from Tax behind him, so couldn't attack when he had to defend, and as such ended up losing out to the other Alpha Tauri on track, Andre Lopez, up ahead of him. Meanwhile, speaking of under attack, Alexander Dimas is again very, very close to Lucas Eduardo at the end of this final sector. Has lost a bit of time there through that corner, so it may not be the opportunity he's looking for this time around. Going to be another run to the line, but again, not really sure it's going to be one that Alexander Dimas is going to be happy with the result of, as he loses out a little bit more time. But with DRS now being enabled, you have 1 or 2 more opportunities to make these moves stick if it's into turn 1 that you're going to do them. You got turn 1 on lap 34 here, and turn 1 again on lap 35. So, what have we got, kids? Anything left to play for?
I think there is. I think there's a lot on the table. I think the biggest thing here now is Alexander Dimas is struggling. There's a bit of battling going on further back. I believe that was Jack Dan being spun out and Santa Maria struggling slightly. I don't think he's got wing damage. I'm not too sure. Yeah, so no wing damage. Doesn't seem any damage between the McLaren or the Aston Martin. Candy King is going for a late move. It is actually Tolashi who has the damage. He's cut the corner, and he's still holding on to position. So he will have to give that back. He gives it back. He's got damage anyway, so he will have to pit or just go to the end of the race. A lot is happening now between all of the drivers. Alexander Dimas is just dropping off of Lucas Eduardo slightly, and Andres Lopez and Cordor are catching back up.
Yeah, Snatch is also looking to try and snatch away a points finish here as well on these soft tyres. He's got one driver ahead of him, but of course that 3-second time penalty that he's accrued is not going to do him any favours, so that whatever the race result was going to be for him with getting into the points is likely not going to matter, as he's lost.
And there's a battle,
and
Andres Lopez has taken Alexander Dimas. Sorry for interrupting there.
No, it's perfectly
big
fine.
Move.
Big move.
There. And Cordor is now chasing down Alexander Dimas. It is the last lap as well. I forgot to mention that. And here comes Cordor on Dimas. No, he doesn't. Bit close. Dimas has a big slide as well. Whoa, what a last lap this is being. Is there going to be any last chance for Cordor to make up the last place on the podium? There might be, as Dimas makes a big mistake. All bit of a mistake as well from his teammate Lopez, who went a bit wide there. Whoa, I think we know who's going to win though. Lucas Eduardo with a nice 1.3 second lead. I think he's got this in the bag.
Yeah, it would definitely look that way, but Codoringolo, is still trying to find a way through Alexander Dimas, who pretty much has had a flawless race up until this point. It's not going to happen, though, for Codoringolo. It's going to happen instead for Lucas Eduardo, who from the ashes rises on up with Andre Lopez in a similar circumstance for P2. That, my boys, is going to be an interesting change at the top of the championship as Codoringolo finishes 4th. Alexander Dimas with a respectable 3rd place that really doesn't represent the pace that he had all race long. The safety cars really did not do him any justice, did not do him any favours, but it is an interesting finish nonetheless for Lucas Eduardo, who takes another win in WOR Tier 3.
Definitely, what a win there for him. 2nd of his season as well. He's had to wait 4 races later after his first. But a very good challenge there from Lucas Eduardo. Really good from him as well. Absolute dominant strategy. I have to give it to him. I think he had the best strategy out of any driver today. Also, we've got to give it as well to Andres Lopez, who now takes the lead of the championship. And he got so close to getting the hat-trick of wins, but he still takes the championship lead no matter what over his teammates. And the other driver who finished on the podium was Alexander Dimas. So another good result for Alexander Dimas, which I think carries him up into 3rd. So quite a lot of interesting stuff going on.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's interesting is it really tells the tale of the tape here is that for the grid spots and the finishing stops, it shows you that race winner Lucas Eduardo really benefited from that safety car. 8th place on the grid, ends up winning the race. And Andre Lopez, again, massively benefiting from that safety car. Started 13th, finishes 2nd. What a performance from those two drivers. What a race that we have seen. And, well, hopefully we get to see another good one next week. Same time, as always, for WOR, the 6th round of the Tier 3 season. Join us then. It won't be me, but it might be somebody else. I'll see you guys later. It's been a pleasure. Have a good evening. Any last words, Freestyler, before you sign off for the night?
I really haven't got any, but thank you for watching.
Yeah, splendid evening. Thank you guys again for watching. We'll see you another time. See you later.
Thank you.